Miles Davis discovered his wife was cheating with his best friend. His response destroyed both their careers. It was March 1969, and Miles was at the peak of his artistic powers, leading one of the most innovative bands in jazz history. But on a cold Thursday evening in New York, he walked into his Upper West Side apartment and found his world collapsing around him. What he saw in his bedroom would trigger a chain of events that would destroy 2 careers, end lifelong friendships, and reveal a side of Miles Davis that even his closest associates had never witnessed. The betrayal was so devastating that it would change not just his personal life, but the entire trajectory of his musical career. By the time the dust settled, 2 people who had been central to his life would be completely erased from the music industry, and Miles would never fully trust anyone again. It was March 13, 1969, and Miles Davis was returning home earlier than expected from a recording session at Columbia Studios. The session for what would become Bitches Brew had been cut short when the studio's main console had malfunctioned, sending the musicians home 3 hours ahead of schedule. Miles was tired, but exhilarated. The new electric direction his music was taking felt revolutionary, and he was eager to share his excitement with his wife, Frances Taylor Davis, a former dancer and one of the most beautiful women in New York's cultural scene. They had been married for 8 years, and despite the ups and downs that came with being married to someone as intense and demanding as Miles, their relationship had been a source of stability in his often chaotic life. As he climbed the stairs to their apartment on West 77th Street, Miles could hear music playing inside. Not his music, but something softer, more romantic. He smiled, thinking Frances was probably preparing for one of her dance rehearsals. She had been working on a new piece with her choreographer, and Miles enjoyed watching her practice. He inserted his key quietly, planning to surprise her. The apartment was dimly lit, candles flickering in the living room. Miles set down his trumpet case and walked toward the bedroom, following the sound of the music and what he now realized were voices. Frances's voice, and another voice he recognized all too well. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Miles saw something that stopped his heart cold. Frances was in bed with Harold Lovett, Miles's booking agent, business manager, and one of his closest friends for over 10 years. Miles stood frozen in the hallway, watching the 2 people he trusted most in the world betraying him in the most intimate way possible. Harold Lovett had been more than a business partner, he had been like a brother to Miles. Harold had handled every aspect of Miles's career, from booking concerts to negotiating record contracts. He had been a guest at Miles and Frances's wedding. He had been in their home countless times, had shared meals with them, had been trusted with their most personal confidences. And now, he was in Miles's bed, with Miles's wife. Miles backed away from the door, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to storm into the room and confront them immediately. Part of him wanted to leave and pretend he had never seen anything. But the dominant feeling was a cold, calculating rage that was more dangerous than any explosion of anger could have been. Miles quietly picked up his trumpet case and left the apartment, closing the door so softly that neither Frances nor Harold heard him leave. He walked to his car and sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, processing what he had just witnessed. This wasn't a momentary indiscretion. The candles, the music, the comfortable familiarity between them, this had been going on for a while. Miles began thinking back over recent months, remembering signs he had ignored or dismissed. Frances's unexplained absences, Harold's increased presence in their home, conversations that stopped when Miles entered a room, business meetings that seemed to take longer than necessary. Miles started the car and drove to the Blue Note, where he knew he could find some of his band members hanging out after their own sessions. He needed to think, and he needed to be around people who understood the music business well enough to help him figure out his next moves. At the Blue Note, he found Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock sitting at a corner table, discussing the technical aspects of the electric instruments they had been experimenting with. They looked up when Miles approached, immediately sensing that something was wrong. "Miles, what's going on?" Wayne asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Miles sat down and ordered a double scotch. When it arrived, he drank half of it before speaking. "I need to ask you guys something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Herbie and Wayne exchanged glances. They had never heard Miles sound so quiet and controlled when he was obviously furious about something. "Have either of you ever noticed anything unusual about Frances and Harold when they're together?" The question hung in the air. Both musicians immediately understood the implications, and their uncomfortable silence told Miles everything he needed to know. "How long?" Miles asked. Wayne looked at Herbie, then back at Miles. "Miles, we didn't know for sure. We had suspicions, but how long?" Miles repeated. "Maybe 6 months," Herbie said quietly. "Maybe longer. We weren't sure if we should say anything. We thought maybe we were misreading the situation." Miles finished his drink and ordered another. "You should have told me." "What are you going to do?" Wayne asked. Miles was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but deadly. "I'm going to destroy both of them." Over the next 2 weeks, Miles methodically planned his revenge with the same precision he brought to his musical arrangements. He didn't confront Frances or Harold directly. Instead, he began making phone calls. Harold Lovett had built his career on his reputation for integrity and discretion. He represented several major jazz artists, and his success depended on the trust of both musicians and venue owners. Miles began systematically undermining that reputation. He called every major jazz club owner in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco. He told them that Harold had been embezzling money from his accounts, that he couldn't be trusted with financial arrangements, that he had been skimming percentages from booking fees. Miles was careful never to make these accusations in writing, and he was careful to phrase them as concerns rather than direct accusations. But the message was clear: Harold Lovett was not to be trusted. Miles also called the other musicians Harold represented. He told them that Harold had been discussing their private business with other clients, that he had been negotiating better deals for some artists while neglecting others, that his loyalties were compromised. Again, Miles was careful about his language, but the implications were devastating. Within 2 weeks, 3 major artists had fired Harold as their representative. 4 jazz clubs had canceled contracts that Harold had negotiated. The word was spreading through the tight-knit jazz community that Harold Lovett was persona non grata. But Miles wasn't finished. He knew that Harold's reputation was only part of his livelihood. The other part was his relationships within the recording industry. Miles called his contacts at Columbia Records, Blue Note, Prestige, and every other major jazz label. He told them that Harold had been trying to manipulate recording contracts, that he had been playing labels against each other unethically, that he was not someone they could work with professionally. The response was swift. Harold found himself cut out of recording session negotiations. Contracts he had been working on for months were suddenly stalled or canceled. Phone calls were not returned. Meanwhile, Miles was planning Frances's downfall with equal precision. Frances had been trying to revive her dance career, and she had been auditioning for several major productions. Miles called the directors, choreographers, and producers involved in these projects. He didn't badmouth Frances's talent. That would have been too obvious and potentially illegal. Instead, he focused on reliability and professionalism. He told them that Frances had been having personal problems that were affecting her ability to commit to rehearsal schedules. He mentioned that she had been distracted during recent performances. He suggested that she might not be in the right frame of mind for major productions. Frances began losing auditions she should have won easily. Callbacks she was expecting never came. Opportunities that had seemed certain began disappearing without explanation. Neither Harold nor Frances initially understood what was happening. The decline in their professional fortunes seemed to coincide, but they didn't immediately connect it to Miles. Harold assumed he was experiencing a temporary downturn in the notoriously unpredictable music business. Frances thought she was simply facing the normal challenges that all dancers encountered as they got older. It wasn't until Harold lost his office lease, The landlord had received calls from several industry professionals expressing concerns about Harold's business practices that he began to suspect what was happening. Harold called Miles, hoping to have a direct conversation about the problems he was experiencing. "Miles, I don't know what's going on, but my business is falling apart. Clients are dropping me, venues won't return my calls, and I'm hearing rumors that someone is spreading stories about me. Do you have any idea what might be happening?" Miles's response was cold and precise. "I know exactly what's happening, Harold. You're experiencing the consequences of your choices." There was a long silence on the phone. "Miles, if this is about Francis and me, we need to talk." "No, we don't," Miles said. "You made your choice when you decided to betray someone who trusted you. Now you're learning what happens when you destroy trust in a business that depends on relationships." "Miles, please. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You were my friend, and you were supposed to be my business partner. Instead, you were sleeping with my wife in my bed. The explanation is simple." Miles hung up the phone. Harold's career never recovered. Within 6 months, he was out of the music business entirely. He eventually moved to California and found work in real estate, but he never again worked in entertainment. Frances confronted Miles when she finally realized what was happening. "Miles, you have to stop this. Yes, Harold and I were having an affair. Yes, we betrayed you, but destroying our careers won't change what happened." "You're right," Miles said. "It won't change what happened, but it will make sure that everyone in this industry knows what happens when you betray Miles Davis. It will make sure that no one ever thinks they can use me and get away with it." "This isn't like you, Miles. You're not vindictive. You're wrong about that. You never really knew me. If you had, you never would have done what you did." Frances filed for divorce 3 months later. She never worked in professional dance again. She eventually remarried and moved to Europe, where she lived quietly for the rest of her life. The aftermath of Miles's revenge was complicated. Other musicians in the jazz community were simultaneously impressed by and frightened of what Miles had done. He had demonstrated that he had the power to destroy careers, but he had also shown that he was capable of ruthlessness that made people wary of getting too close to him. Miles himself was changed by the experience. The easy trust he had once placed in friends and associates was gone forever. He became more isolated, more suspicious, more likely to test people's loyalty before allowing them into his inner circle. His music also changed. The albums he recorded in the months following the betrayal were darker, more aggressive, more emotionally complex. Critics noted a new intensity in his playing, but they didn't understand the personal devastation that was driving it. Years later, when jazz historians wrote about this period of Miles's career, they focused on his musical innovations and his influence on the development of fusion. But people close to Miles knew that the betrayal by Frances and Harold had fundamentally altered not just his personal life, but his artistic approach. The story became a cautionary tale in jazz circles about the dangers of mixing personal and professional relationships. It also became an example of how powerful connections and reputation could be weaponized in an industry built on trust and personal relationships. Miles never spoke publicly about what Frances and Harold had done to him, but he also never forgave them. When Harold died in 1995, Miles did not attend the funeral. When Frances died in 2001, Miles's only comment was, "I heard." The betrayal taught Miles that talent and success could make you powerful, but they couldn't protect you from the people closest to you. It taught him that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, and that in a world where personal and professional relationships were intertwined, revenge could be both complete and devastating. If this story of betrayal, revenge, and the dark side of fame moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that actions have consequences and that some betrayals can never be forgiven or forgotten. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that changed how you view relationships? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out more stories about the personal struggles behind legendary careers.